Right. Kenny Callipy here with George Stahl from Next Play Academy. We're continuing our leadership series, and we're here with Rick Broering today. Rick, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you've been around a little bit, different programs, that sort of thing, so we wanted to get your take on what you've seen in leadership styles, what you've seen that's effective, and then you're a leader of your own entrepreneurial spirit, doing a lot of different things, so we want to know what's kept you self-disciplined and successes you've seen, shortcomings as well. So,
sure.
George, let's start off.
Yeah, I guess just to start, just talk about your journey of where you've come from and where you are now and how you got there from NKY fan to now your online scouting program to now calling games for NKU. You've kind of been doing a bunch of different hats on. So just to kind of talk about your journey of how you got there.
Yeah, it's really kind of come full circle because I remember when I was like 11 years old, I was very self-aware. And I realized that nobody in the NBA looked like myself at that time. And I told that to my dad, and my parents were really good about pumping us up. And he was like, don't sell yourself short type of deal. And I was like, I think I'm going to have to find another way to stay around basketball, because I'm going to work in basketball. And so at that point, I wanted to be a play-by-play guy and call games. And when I got to college, that's what I started doing at the high school level for a online website. And that kind of morphed into, I realized there wasn't enough coverage, and I had just got done playing high school sports in Northern Kentucky. So I felt like that was an underserved niche. And I got to NKU and was originally writing for the school newspaper, the Northern. And they were sending me to softball games and hockey matches or whatever you call hockey events. I don't even know. And I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be covering the basketball team and things like that. And I thought it's crazy for me to be working for someone else, not even making money and not doing what I want to do. So I branched out and I decided to start my own blog covering high school sports and doing exactly what I wanted to do. And that just kind of set the tone for the rest of my career, really. It's just I decided this is going to be hard to make money at, so I better do it my way and be able to live with myself every night and enjoy every morning when I wake up and be passionate about what I'm doing. And so that's kind of how I've kept doing it. I went from that to NKY fan at one point. We're sponsored by Roses and Skyline, and they really helped bankroll that for a while. And then, I was covering Xavier from the end of my college career on as well for at one point Rivals, and then Scout.com, and now 24/7 Sports. So it's just kind of kept progressing. And then I'd kind of completely given up on the play-by-play and calling games on radio or TV. And then recently I got the opportunity to start calling games as the analyst for NKU, which was really kind of a surprise. And one of those things where it's like, I guess you just kind of stick around long enough and right place, right time type of things can happen for you.
Right. So, and one thing that it seems like all those things have in common is you got to be self-disciplined. You have to. Is there anything that you do specifically, or just kind of speak about the self-discipline that you have in order to be successful, what that looks like to you, even day to day? Just what does that look like?
Man, I'm still trying to figure out, honestly. I think the biggest thing is time management is the most important thing to what I do, because like you said, I've worn so many hats and try to juggle multiple jobs at the same time, because quite honestly, in 2020, if you're doing media and you haven't made it big, that's what you have to do. You're going to be working multiple jobs. And so time management is really, really important. And I don't think I'm very good at it yet. So I'm always looking for new hacks and, looking at other successful people and how they've figured out time management and trying to incorporate some of those things. But for me, I think it's a constant process. I've tried to overcome my shortcomings in time management by just outworking other people and just constantly working. I try not to waste a lot of time during my day, but I feel like I could be a lot more efficient. And so that's something I'm always trying to strive for.
So a lot of those hours are evening hours, athletic events. It's towards the end of the day. What sacrifices have you made that maybe somebody in college isn't willing to make? And again, back to the kind of self-discipline part of things, you're putting in the work. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it all comes down to what opportunities you want for yourself. Mm-hmm. And the more things you're willing to sacrifice, the more opportunities you'll open up. And for me, and this was just my route that I took, but doing the high school sports stuff and then the college sports stuff, it meant giving up most of my weekends, Friday nights and Saturday nights, throughout my early 20s and throughout my entire 20s really, and into my 30s now. So I'm getting some of those weekends back occasionally now, but for, really almost a decade, I hardly went out on weekends at all with friends, and just tried to fit the social life around doing that stuff on the weekend. So I'd say that was probably the biggest sacrifice. But that goes into a lot of things. I mean, even dating, there was a strain on a lot of relationships and just friends. I mean, you lose contact with a lot of people when you can't go out with them on the times they're going out and socializing. So I'd say that's the biggest thing.
Do you find yourself, because a lot of this is during basketball season, that where you're the most busy, is it easier when basketball's over, or is there new things that pick up? What do you find yourself? I mean, let's talk about now this upcoming off season. What does that look like to you when basketball's March Madness is over? What does it look like to you with your schedule?
Yeah, I think it's different now because I've added the NKU job into the mix, and now I'm covering 2 teams at the same time, and so it's made it really chaotic this season. Normally in the past, I've told people like the Xavier stuff doesn't end for me covering Xavier because I have a heavy emphasis on recruiting. And so right after the season ends, you go right in that spring AAU season. You're going to be on the road traveling for AAU tournaments. You're going to be calling up recruits, trying to figure out. I mean, that's a really important time, especially with the transfer portal now in college basketball. There's a lot of work to be done right after the season ends because everyone's reshaping the roster and trying to figure out what their team next year is going to look like. And so for me, that's kind of where our site excels and shines. And so that's a lot of work. And then again, in July, you get a lot of AAU events and tournaments. And August and September is really when a lot of commitments happen. So those months are still really busy for me on the college basketball side, but it will be, I feel like, a little bit of a chance to breathe once March Madness hits for me because I won't be calling games for NKU anymore. And it'll just go back to writing. So, but also, I mean, I'm working overnights at Channel 12 still every day. So it's not like, it's not like work goes away or really stops at any point.
So what does your typical week look like? You get your hands in 3, 4, 5 different things. It sounds like. What's a typical week for you?
Yeah, my favorite part about what I've done in my life and set up work-wise is that every week is different, and I think I need that. I don't think I'm really good at routine, and I don't like it that much. I get bored with things and want to switch it up. But a lot of times, I mean, I work 5 nights a week overnight, every weeknight at Channel 12. So I work from midnight to 8 a.m. I usually get off. Immediately, I'm on my message board for Xavier. I'm making calls to high school coaches, AAU coaches, college coaches, just trying to get information so I can either share information on my message board with Xavier fans or write something or get information about recruits that may help me out later. And I try to fit in like a nap, somewhere between like 2 to 6 hours at some point during the day. And then usually in the evenings, like on Monday night, I'll have a coach's show for NKU. Sometimes I may have Xavier practice at 3 p.m. where I feel like I need to make it over to practice and watch what's going on. And then, multiple nights a week, I'll have an NKU game or a Xavier game at like 7 p.m. So I'll do that, and I'll get home from that, usually try to take a 1-hour nap, and then go back into work at midnight again for Channel 12. So then on the weekends, it's a lot of more games and a lot of times travel now with the NKU gigs. So
Staying busy.
yeah, kind of switches the day-to-day, but it's always kind of similar in terms of what I'm doing.
So next question, I know it's something maybe that basketball players listening to this would, maybe want to know. You've been in numerous AAU tournaments now, ever since I've known you during that whole season. It's a lot of AAU tournaments. You've seen countless players play. You've seen countless players recruited, and for different reasons. What is it that, I guess, from your perspective, that separates players from being, good to great to elite? What are the things that you see as kind of a bystander, I guess, in a way of just, seeing these players and seeing what the coaches look for, what the players are showing the coaches? What is it that, from your perspective, that you see?
I think very, very rarely you get that just extraordinary God-given talent that is just good naturally. And they don't have to work that hard at it. They don't have to necessarily love the game, and they'll just be that good. Like I think of a guy like O.J. Mayo. I don't think, the thing around him was always that he didn't quite work as hard as he maybe could have and didn't maximize himself, but he was still maybe the best prospect I've ever seen, and that includes LeBron James. Like he was that good as a high school player. And so he's the exception. I don't think there are hardly any of those out there. For everyone else, the number one thing, without question, that separates elite or great from really good is the love of the game. I mean, they'll just work so much harder and refuse to give in or be outworked or be beaten. I mean, those types of guys have just a drive that no one else has. I mean, I think, in terms of guys I've been closest to, I think like a guy like Terrell Holloway at Xavier, who played point guard. A lot of people know him as 2. And you look at his measurables, I mean, he was like 6 foot, not super quick, not a good leaper, and not a great shooter from the outside. He just made himself through hard work and just sheer willpower a great player at the college level, and has had a good professional career overseas as well. So I think that is the biggest things in terms of intangibles. Also the hardest thing for a coaching staff to figure out when they're recruiting a kid, because you can't always see, and guys can fool you and make you think, because they work with a trainer constantly or whatever, that they do love the game. But it's a different level when you get to like high major college basketball, and that kind of separates itself at that level. I think it's the difference between a lot of players that were 5-star or 4-star recruits at one time and didn't pan out versus the guys that do and become stars. It's their love for the sport. In terms of actual like tangible things or things that you see on the court, I think it's without a doubt IQ. Guys with IQ that understand how to play the game, that it's not just being unselfish and passing the ball, it's being good at passing the ball and being able to make other people better in the way that you create plays for them and see the game. That is something that takes guys from being good players to great players. The number one skill set that I think is undervalued and that players overlook way too often is still shooting. To me, it's amazing how often I still see guys who aren't that athletic that can't shoot or aren't elite shooters. And there's really no reason for it, because it's the number one skill that you can improve on your own as a player. And it's the number one skill that's valued in basketball, especially in 2020, when we have all these analytics saying shooting 3-pointers and jumpers is the best way to go about playing offense. And yet there's still a lot of players who spend countless hours in the gym working on all types of things with trainers and getting stronger and quicker and trying to get incrementally fast muscle twitch going on, but yet they can't shoot at an elite level. And that, to me, that's crazy. I think every player should spend as much time as possible becoming a great shooter.
Yeah, that's good.
There are a lot of parallels there that you just mentioned with yourself and these elite players. And I know you probably didn't even mean to do that intentionally, but you put in the time, you've been successful, you finally broke through. You have a love for the game, and your love's a little bit different than some of these other kids, but that passion is what's driving you and driving these guys too. Is there anything that you've seen or any stories that you can recall where coaches may have passed on a kid because of maybe his mental makeup or his behavior during a game, anything specific? Anything like that you can recall of? You always hear these stories about kids behaving a certain way, they don't realize who's watching and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
you don't have to name names. I'm just curious.
Yeah, honestly, for me, stories like that don't stand out as much, because I see more coaches that take the kid with the problem because they think they can overcome it with his talent, or they take the kid that is a bad teammate. And you can easily see that by the way he plays in the AAU. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, he's good enough, he's talented enough, he scores enough, we'll take the chance on him, right. And it backfires. I think I see that far more than the coach who passes on the kid. Yeah. And I think that's more a cautionary tale for coaches than it is for players, because a lot of times the message that's sent on the AAU circuit is that you'll still get recruited even if you're not the best teammate, as long as you go get buckets or what have you. Right. That being said, I think like I've seen it happen the other way a lot more often, where a guy isn't a highly recruited guy or isn't highly touted in terms of the rankings, that he's playing alongside a highly touted guy. Yeah. And so coaches happen to be there watching the game, or they're watching a player on another team, and just through the way that this guy plays the game, carries himself on the court, hustles after every loose ball. The kid that played point guard for Huggins at West Virginia just a couple of years ago, the balding kid, drawing a blank.
I know the story.
Yeah, but
Carter.
Javon Carter.
Yeah.
Javon Carter is from West Virginia, is a perfect example of that played for Bob Huggins, because he was a guy that wasn't recruited at all. And even after Bob Huggins started recruiting him, everyone was like, what is he doing? Like, this guy can't play at this level. And he just saw something in the way that he handled himself on the court and how hard he competed, that he was willing to take a chance on the guy. I think that happens far more often than the opposite. Like, I think you can play your way into a scholarship or into an opportunity by doing all the right things. Mm-hmm. Then you'll lose opportunities by not doing the right things if you're really talented.
That's good.
Right. Because we preach and hear an expert all the time. You can control the effort. You can control your attitude. And those are the things that, like Javon Carter, I don't know, the story was Huggins saw him pressing, I guess, at 8 in the morning during an AAU game, and how true that is. I guess I'll never know, but he was pressing and nobody else was, and playing that hard at 8 o'clock in the morning as Huggins is walking in drinking his coffee.
Yeah.
And he fell in love with that. But it's the effort and the attitude that he saw that was under his control.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's really specific thing. I mean, like, you know, I think a lot of times people just say that and it becomes this ambiguous cliche, but it's like in basketball, we know very specific things that like dictate it's 50-50 balls. It's, you know, being the best rebounder you can possibly be at your position. Like that, taking pride in something like that, or saying the guy, I'm going to be the best defender on my team, or the best defender I can possibly be. Those things manifest themselves and are so obvious when you watch them happen. But so many guys like think I'm a role guy, and they don't take pride in being a star at that specific role, whether it be defense or rebounding or making a teammate better through creating plays. Like maybe you can't shoot from the outside and your coach is constantly telling you not to shoot from the outside. And you take that as he's tearing down my confidence. In reality, you should say, okay, if I can't shoot from the outside, how can I make a teammate better through my perimeter play? And that's probably, you know, playing off of ball screens or manipulating ball screens and creating plays for a teammate. But there are very specific things you can do to play the right way and play with great effort and play hard and all those things and play focused. It's not like just a cliche of you should be running hard up and down the court and sprinting at all times.
Right. I completely agree. The star in your role is great. And that's what a lot of players lose sight of that because, like you said, it's the coach is tearing down my confidence, you know, because they say this or that. And same thing we talk about all the time too is you get confidence by one, you work at it by practice, and two, positive self-talk. And the coach has nothing to do with those two things. So if you can do those two things and then you star in your role by doing those, the sky's the limit within your role. And that role could always change as well too.
Yeah, and then that's the role usually does change when you take care of
start in that role.
Yeah, when you take care of the other things, other people's confidence grow in you, and they want you to expand your role all of a sudden.
Right.
So I think, to me, players' willingness to accept their role is the most important thing for a team's success. Having guys that are bought in, and not just bought in, but understand exactly what you want out of them and are willing to provide those things. If you have that, you're going to have a great chance to be successful. You still need talent, you still need skill, but if you have that, you're going to go a long way.
So you've been around a lot of different programs, different leaders, guys that are looking at these recruits. What have you seen in leadership styles from them? You know, you've been around a number of coaches at Xavier, NKU, number of coaches, and I'm sure you've been elsewhere and you've seen other coaches during games. What sticks out to you? Different leadership styles that work, different leadership styles that are completely different but still work. What are some things that you attribute to success?
So one of the most important things I've seen that coaches do well, I think good coaches do well, is being able to build confidence for their players, give them confidence, let them play free and play their style while also demanding a certain standard and never wavering from that standard and making sure it's always adhered to. And I think that's a really difficult line to walk because when you're constantly demanding excellence and trying to hold to a standard, it's really easy to take away guys' confidence and have them constantly looking over their shoulder and feel like they're being micromanaged. And so I think a perfect example of two guys who had different styles of that but also had a lot of success locally is Chris Mack and Mick Cronin when they were at UC and Xavier simultaneously because they were almost exact opposites in terms of like letting their players play through mistakes versus yanking them out of the game if they turned the ball over and things of that nature. Yet at the same time, you know, like they both were pretty darn good in terms of winning basketball games. Yeah. So I think that's a good example. But I think the other thing to me that makes a really great coach is one that is willing to adapt his style of coaching to his personnel. I mean, we hear so much about coaches having systems and things like that, whether it be offense or defense. And to me, systems don't really matter. It's being able to get your team to buy into your system and make the system work with the type of players that you have. Because really, in recruiting, you're really going to be limited if you say, we have to recruit to this exact style of play. It's much better off to be able to go out and say, we want the best player available, and we can cater how we play to that type of player.
That's good.
Is there any player that sticks out in your mind of maybe the best player or leader you've ever been around didn't have to play for, Xavier or NKU, anything locally that you've covered, or maybe you have, just anything that anybody you've been around that's been the best player or leader. Does anybody come to mind?
I tell you what, I think one that always jumps out to me, even when I get asked this specifically about like college guys I've covered and stuff, the first name that always comes up that a lot of local people will recognize is former Covcath point guard Nick Ruthsatz. I just remember him playing high school ball, and from the time that he was a sophomore, there was never any question about whose team it was when he was on the court. And I thought that he did all the right things in terms of hard work, making his teammates better, being the first guy to show up, the last guy to leave, all that cliche stuff in terms of being like the hardest worker. But he was also the most fiery competitor that held his teammates to a high standard without them resenting it or feeling like he was, a bad guy or a bad teammate. He always just stands out to me as one of the all-time great leaders that I've been around in terms of sports. In terms of, Xavier, I mentioned to Holloway before, he wasn't a guy who was real vocal. He wouldn't say much at practice, but the way he played and the way he demanded his teammates to play and just his competitive nature, I think, really rubbed off on people. So it's kind of different in the fact that he wasn't a rah-rah guy or a guy who really talked to his teammates a lot, but he still was able to lead just through his example and the way, the tone that he set every day in practice and during games.
The last question I got here, this one's more about you personally. I know one thing I've told you always respected about you is that you always stay true to yourself and who you are through when you very first started with NKY Fan until now. You've always been you. Has that been something that you've thought about, have you struggled with, or has it been easy for you to think about in the different types of jobs you've had so far?
Yeah, it's funny. It's probably the number one thing I think about on a daily basis with what I do. When you're in the public eye a little bit doing the media stuff, you do have to think about those things and how it's going to come off and how your employer is going to feel about you doing it. And at the same time, you want to build an audience, especially in this age of social media where, back in the day, if you were in media, you wanted to work for the LA Times or you wanted to work for ESPN or what have you. I mean, it was the institution really made the journalist or the entertainer. Now with social media and the way it goes, they're hiring the person with the biggest following. So you really are your own media entity to yourself, and you've got to build a fan base and have people following you, or you won't get job opportunities in the future. And so it's a difficult line to walk, knowing that sometimes what's probably best and most marketable about yourself isn't going to be what your employer wants you doing or saying on social media. And I walk that line and probably walk it too often, honestly. But I made the decision a long time ago that this stuff wasn't going to work for me unless I did it the way I wanted to do it, and I was myself. And I didn't want to do it another way. And so I probably step over that line a little more than I should because I'm okay with risking some opportunities at the chance of being who I want to be and doing it my way. And overall, I would say it's worked out enough for me. I don't know if I would recommend people try to replicate what I've done because it's been a circuitous route to get here. But I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I've been able to say, like, no one told me I had to change or do something differently. I was always able to do it the way I wanted to do it. So I would recommend it, but I'm not sure that it's the best advice.
Do you have any other standards? Standard of holding yourself to being yourself? Do you have anything else like that? Any core values, anything like that?
I think the biggest thing, I see a lot of people that are just afraid to, they tell themselves no about a lot of things before they ever even try them or get started doing them or jump into them. And my thing is, like, I've got so many balls in the air that I'm juggling. I know I'm going to screw them up. I know for a fact I'm going to fail at some of the stuff I'm doing. I'd just much rather fail at 2 of the 5 to 10 things that I'm doing and still have a bunch going than, win a game 1-0. Like, I'll win 10-6 or whatever, to me, it's really hard to pitch the no-hitter in life. And I don't want to be held to that one chance that I took and it never worked out. I'm hoping that if I try enough things and do enough things, eventually I'll find exactly what it is that I want to do. And if not, hopefully it'll be a fulfilling life that I did. I tried a lot of different things that I wanted to try, and I'll be able to say at the end, like, I gave it my best.
That's great. Do you have anybody that you've kind of modeled your podcast off of and your scouting, like any mentors, anybody you've looked up to? And, we've talked about this a little bit with other coaches. Originality now is an adaptation. it's kind of stealing ideas and making them your own. Do you have anybody that you seek advice from a lot and go to?
Yeah, in terms of media, I mean, there's so many people. I think I look up to a lot more people and have sort of followed, like, okay, what do they do and how do they handle themselves and carry themselves? Like, I mean, there's so many examples, but like I grew up listening to Mo Egger and Lance McAllister every day in terms of sports talk. And so they've always been kind of role models of mine. And the way that they've then like gone on to sort of ask me to be a part of their show, but then handled themselves as, just colleagues, I guess you would say. I've always really respected the way they carry themselves. Joe and Byron that called the Xavier games, I grew up listening to them because my dad went to Xavier. And so knowing I wanted to do play-by-play and stuff, I always thought they were like great. And they are celebrities at Xavier. When they're constantly getting interrupted by people want to come up and talk to them even while they're on air and stuff. And the way they handle that are so graceful with their time and the way they interact with fans always really stood out to me. And I always think like I could do a much better job of being how they are and treating people the right way. Richard Skinner has taken me in since I was 18 and really given me a lot of opportunities where he's the one who's pushed me into the opportunity and opened up the door for me. And then he's been the one to tell me, hey, you're screwing this up, get your stuff together. And then he's also been the first one to pat me on the back and tell me I'm doing a good job and critique me and help me out. So I've had so many great people show me different ways to do things that it's really hard to name them all. But I try to consume as much media as I possibly can. And part of the reason I do that is because you mentioned like there's not much originality.
Right.
I want to try to stay original. And the way that I do that is I try not to listen to any one person too often because I feel like I will start stealing some of their stuff. I want to hear everyone as much as I possibly can and hope that, okay, I'd steal an idea or a thought or whatever, but mostly it's still originating from me when it comes down to it. And I'm just taking a little bit from everybody and learning from everyone.
That's great. Well, we appreciate it. We talked about helping people out. You're helping us out here, so we appreciate helping kids out and coaches and that sort of thing.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Thanks again, Rick.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.